Okay, hopefully you can hear me over the fan in the back. Obviously, I have a problem with the fan. This is the last video about this bar top. Um, the bar top is fully working. Fully working, noisy fan needs to be replaced. This hole needs to be filled and the monitor should be recapped. Other than that, it is working. I have decided though that I am not interested enough in keeping it. I have a full-size game that I can hook a MAME PC to that I've got running in CGA resolution. Um, it's only set up for MAME right now, not consoles, but I don't really play a lot of console games. So this test of could I make this bar top work is a success, but it's not something that I think I would use enough to keep. So just wanted to show that I did finish it. Everything works, albeit a noisy fan and a monitor that can stand to be recapped. Wow, very noisy fan. So ended up tidying up the wiring with some zip ties. So all of these can be disconnected and the switches removed or replaced. I'm using buttons 1, 2, 3, and then I added 4, and then 5 and 6. These were already in the cabinet. When it was a bar top, there is the audio amp velcroed in. It has stereo output, so I've just wired the right and left speakers both together. Both the right and left positive and right and left negatives go to the single speaker. This is power coming in from a USB plug that's plugged into the Raspberry Pi. I think this amp would probably be louder if it was running on its own power supply. It might be a bit on the quiet side because it's only pulling whatever voltage the Raspberry Pi is allowing. That's just a theory. I haven't actually plugged it into a separate power supply to verify that. There's the audio jack that also goes back to the Raspberry Pi. And that's about it for the front. I don't know if I could spin it around here. In the back, looks kind of goofy, but I have mounted a cut-off extension power plug, power cord to the Raspberry Pi power supply with zip ties holding it in place so that it doesn't hit anything and it's up out of the way instead of taking up room in the bottom of the case. And then we see we've got the Raspberry Pi velcroed down, 4 strips of Velcro about an inch square, 1 in each corner. We've got the fan drawing air out of the Raspberry Pi, and then this noisy AC fan in the back of the bar top unit that pulls air out of the cabinet. This USB plug is the one that goes to the audio amp, so it's USB on this side, and then the black and red wires cutting off the other end of this cable. The 5 volt red and the ground black wire go into the audio amp to provide power for it. You might be able to see back there the audio jack that comes out of the Raspberry Pi that goes to the audio amp. And then there's the micro SD where the power to the Raspberry Pi is coming from here, from this AC power plug. And then here you see the RGB Pi which kind of got me into making this project because it's got the wiring for all the controls as well as the video, so you can pull it directly off of that board and plug it into the controls. You don't need to plug USB controls into the Raspberry Pi and then convert them to the arcade buttons. So you don't need a pad hack or anything. It's just a clean way to wire the Raspberry Pi to some controls and to a CGA tube monitor, which is the Wells Gardner Wells Gardner K7000 monitor in here. So everything put together. This right here, the wires from the RGB Pi go over to the black connector there, which is where it disconnects. So you can take the Pi out and leave the controls in. You can take the controls out and leave the Pi in just by separating the disconnect up there. You can add more controls. This will control buttons 1 through 8 for player 1 and also for player 2. So I don't know if I've got that many wires extra left in this harness, but several extra wires in this harness that could be wired up for additional controls. If I was going to, say, make a bar top, move this over to it, and have 2 players with multiple buttons, I've got the RGB Pi will allow that if I have enough spare wires, which I don't know that I do, because then I'd need 4 for joystick, 1 for ground, and then 1 for each button after that, and I'm not sure how many I have left. But anyway, enough to get this project off the ground and completed to the point where it needs a fan, rubber feet so it's not on a Lazy Susan, so it doesn't do this when you play, and then plugging up this big hole in the control panel where a button used to be, and repainting the control panel. And going through the software, making sure all the emulators, they're using the right buttons. My friend ran me through some of the menu options because the way it came, even though it's supposed to be plug and play, some of the console games had this as basically your fire button, and this is your jump button instead of the other way around. So he swapped that around. I think it was for Nintendo that we were working on, and got that working the right way. So there's still possibly some configuration that could be done to it to make it a fully fledged and done on the software side project. But again, I decided I don't have room for this. I wouldn't play this enough to justify keeping it or even building a bar top from scratch when I have a full-size arcade cabinet that I have a PC with hacked video drivers that I currently just have a Groovy MAME set up on, but I could run console games on that in emulation if I wanted to. So the Raspberry Pi wouldn't really suit me for anything that I do on this as it stands. So final video, and what I'm probably going to do is pull this panel off, put back on one of the original panels that just has 5 of the square yellow buttons. So I'll keep the buttons and the joystick, and then pull the Raspberry Pi out and everything else, and just see if I can just list this on Craigslist as a bar top with a working monitor that you can hook arcade boards to for a test unit, or let somebody else decide if they want to just take the monitor out and use it outside the cabinet like I'm going to do with the other monitor that I got, because I got 3 of these, and so now I have only this one left that's full, complete, and then the 2 monitors plus all the parts I pulled out of the other 2 cabinets. So I'll be keeping 1 monitor and probably getting rid of 1 monitor as a standalone monitor, and this maybe I'll try to sell as it is boxed up, because maybe somebody will be interested in that, basically doing what I did and turning it into a cabinet that'll maybe run a JAMA game if you put a small PCB that'll fit inside the cabinet, or they might have some other small PC or Raspberry Pi and they want to do it some other way. So that's it, fully working. Needs final touches, but not going to be done by me because I have enough projects, and I've proven that this one works and got it up and running, and that was pretty cool, but in the end, not something I'm going to keep.